This is an absolutely shocking statement. BlackRock says you should own more than 0.001061 Bitcoin, more Bitcoin than the average person, because there are new recommendations from BlackRock about how much Bitcoin you should have. And what's interesting is that all of this is being confirmed by Larry Laparte, who is now talking about how you should go off zero. So you shouldn't have zero Bitcoin. You don't need a huge amount, but you should at least have a small allocation. 0.001061 Bitcoins is roughly equivalent to about €1,000. And earlier, I watched this interview with Larry Lepard, and it was truly fascinating what he made clear here. He says that the price of Bitcoin will easily rise to 500,000. He also gives very clear reasons. Now, I don't want to sell you on the idea that with 0.001061 Bitcoin or something like that, you'll be driving a Lambo tomorrow or anything. No, that's not what I'm saying, but I just want to point out that, based on BlackRock's estimates, this would definitely mean you're off to a pretty good start in the Bitcoin network. So you really don't need a lot here, especially when you compare yourself to the entire world population. Most people aren't even thinking about Bitcoin, they're still in a bratwurst coma, a dumpling coma. I don't know what they're doing, just messing around with stuff in some TikTok craze. We're about to break down all the numbers. This is going to be super interesting. I'm going to show you that right now. But first, smash that like button if you want to see Bitcoin break out to the upside, if you want Bitcoin to make its way further into the mainstream. You really need to support videos like this so they get shown by the YouTube algorithm. Thanks also to everyone who keeps liking and commenting so diligently. And I think Jordi Visser, who is truly a financial market analyst and expert and often appears on Pompliano's show, really sums it up perfectly here. He says that Bitcoin is its own asset class, which is currently, at the moment, underowned. In other words, there are far too few people who own Bitcoin, and that will become even clearer to you in just a moment. But at the same time, this asset class actually works. And if we look at it now, stocks are not underowned. There are definitely enough people who own stocks, but stocks aren't working. Plenty of people use real estate, but real estate isn't working either. Plenty of people use bonds, but bonds absolutely do not work. A lot of people use or own private equity, but that also absolutely does not work. And gold, well, it works to some extent, but it also has certain flaws. And when I say here that it doesn't work, stocks don't work, real estate, bonds, and so on don't work, what I mean is that, first of all, you have third-party risks, and in some cases you have negative real returns. Sure, you might get lucky with a property where that's not the case, or with stocks if you pick good ones, but if you just buy an index, you can clearly see that sometimes it just doesn't work that well. And in a moment, we'll take a look at the numbers from BlackRock to see how they come up with the idea that 0.0162 Bitcoin, no wait, 0.061 Bitcoin, now I'm getting confused, could actually be enough to really have a strong position right from the start. But before we look at the numbers, we need to quickly switch over to Larry Lepard, because he explains it all in detail. This has to do with the BlackRock prediction and why it's so important to have at least 0.0161 Bitcoin, even just a small amount.
Well, I would just say, don't sell your Bitcoin and get off. If you don't have any Bitcoin, get off of zero. I mean, to me, this is an opportunity that your grandkids will, remember, and don't mess it up. I mean, it's a very unique and rare time that we live in. You're not too late. 109 is not too much to pay. When the coins are $1 million or $5 million, you'll feel like you're a genius that you bought it at 100. So, get your coins. Buy whatever you can afford to buy.
And now you also better understand why I say here, okay, hey, you don't necessarily need to have 10 Bitcoin or 20 or 30 Bitcoin right away. Just start with 0.01061 Bitcoin. That's simply your starting point, and from there you can always buy more. That doesn't mean you have to stay at that level. But what would definitely be a mistake is if you don't have at least that amount of Bitcoin, or even less than that. I mean, of course, none of this is financial advice or anything like that. It's not financial consulting. You have to decide for yourself, of course, but Larry Lepard makes it very clear here. You shouldn't mess up what's happening right now. This is a truly special time. Your kids will remember this. You really shouldn't have zero Bitcoin right now. You shouldn't sell your Bitcoin, especially if you have very little Bitcoin. If you have less than 0.01061 Bitcoin, then you definitely shouldn't sell your Bitcoin. Your kids will remember all of this. Don't mess it up, use self-custody. Get yourself a hardware wallet. I'll put a link down below where you can order a hardware wallet, a TREZOR hardware wallet. With the code BitcoinHotel, you'll get a discount. Check it out. And remember, it's still not too late. That means you're not late to the party. When Bitcoin hits 5 million, 10 million, you'll feel like a genius, even if it feels expensive now. But it always feels expensive. Max Kaiser also said that when Bitcoin was at $1, he thought it was way too expensive. No, at 5 million, at 10 million, at 20 million, you'll feel like the ultimate boss. You'll feel like Jesus reincarnated in physical form, or I don't know, in the flesh. Yeah, and you should just buy what you can afford. That means everyone buys as much as they can, one person for 100 euros, another for 1,000, another for 10,000. And everyone does it at their own pace. You don't have to get greedy or rush into it, or look at someone else and think, oh, they have more Bitcoin than I do, and then get jealous or anything like that. No, you have to do it at your own pace. And honestly, if you buy 0.01061 Bitcoin now, you're not going to be driving around in a limbo next week or anything like that. But over the course of 20, 30, or even 40 years, you can really accumulate a significant amount of wealth, especially if you are consistently adding more Bitcoin to your holdings over time. This steady accumulation can make a big difference in the long run. Most importantly, the potential for growth here is massive, and it's something that shouldn't be underestimated. What a lot of people often misunderstand or simply don't fully grasp is that if you don't realize your gains, meaning if you just keep holding on to your Bitcoin instead of selling it when the price goes up, then the numbers you'll eventually see in your account can really be astonishing. The value can increase dramatically, and the results might truly blow your mind, especially if you have the patience to hold for many years. And Larry Lepard explains this in the next section, which I found even more fascinating.
So, in 5 years, I mean, I could easily see it be $500,000. In 10 years, the trend line is 1 million. So that would exist. That would 1,000,001 actually. So that and the one standard deviation up is 2.2, and 2 is 6 million.
So here he's describing his price model from his new book, The Big Print, and here he goes into the power law models and says very clearly that in about 5 years, Bitcoin could easily be at 500,000. And in 10 years, we could easily be at 1 million, as he explains. And this is already the conservative, let's say, base or bear case. Of course, there are also the standard deviations, the first standard deviation, the second standard deviation upwards, and so on, where Bitcoin could, in some cases, break out to as much as 6 million in 10 years, and in 5 years, it could break out to over 2 million. But when you get into those regions, Bitcoin will also correct relatively quickly back down in the areas of the first and second standard deviations. In those upper ranges, you usually only stay for a very short time, and most of the time, you end up moving back toward the base case. For example, in 5 years, that's 500,000, in 10 years, it's 1 million, and in 20 years, it's even more extreme. And then you also understand that, for example, if you simply have a long time horizon, meaning if you currently have very few Bitcoin, that might seem bad right now, but if your time horizon is very long, say 20 or 30 years, then of course that really works in your favor. Of course, I realize that not everyone has 20 or 30 years. I know there are some older people watching too. For them, it's different. They really have to make sure they accumulate a lot of Bitcoin now, especially if they don't have as much money or time left. Yeah, that's just how it is. If you're still young, let's say you're around 20, you have a time horizon of 40 or 50 years. I mean, in that case, even having 0.0161 Bitcoin is actually realistic for creating generational wealth over 40 or 50 years. But if you only have a 5-year time frame, then of course that's completely unrealistic, and you always have to keep that in mind. And now, the question here is how exactly you arrive at the 0.0161 Bitcoin figure, because actually, before I made this video, I first saw Larry Lepard's statements in an interview, and then I went on X, and I actually saw this statement here. Someone on X posted new statements from BlackRock. Although I don't think they're actually that new. I think I've even reported on them in the past, perhaps even more than once, or maybe even several times. But it fit really well here because BlackRock actually says that Bitcoin could be the next reserve currency. So that's the first statement. That would of course mean that even fewer Bitcoin would be enough, so to speak. If Bitcoin really does become the reserve currency, then yes, Bitcoin will easily rise to 10 million, 20 million, and so on. So in my opinion, even the power law model would probably be broken to the upside if this were to happen within the next 5 to 10 years. But BlackRock's current recommendation to their clients is an allocation of 2%. And I just made a few assumptions here, which were actually pretty conservative. I simply assumed that in Germany, the average saver has about 50,000 euros set aside. That means this includes, say, a property, stocks, bonds, gold, Bitcoin, and so on. So I just went with 50,000 euros as a baseline. I actually just looked it up. The average net worth in Germany in 2023 was even 324,000 euros. If you check on Wiki, on ChatGPT, and the median net worth, where basically the top and bottom are excluded. The belly here is then 106,600 euros. I'm not sure if these numbers are accurate, so I decided to be even more conservative here. So, according to these numbers, you'd actually be in the lower middle, or rather the lower range, in terms of net worth. Now, let's assume someone has 50,000 euros in assets, and then we'll use BlackRock's 2% allocation. So, 2% of that is exactly 1,000 euros. And if we now assume that the price is, well, roughly somewhere around, we're currently somewhere between 95,000 euros and 100,000 euros, depending on when you're watching this video. Could also be 105,000 euros if you're watching this video later in the year or something like that. But let's just say, roughly, the current price is around 100,000 euros. Like I said, it could be plus or minus 10,000 or so. We're not being super precise here. So that would mean you need 0.01061 Bitcoin to equal those 2%. And that's how you arrive at the number that with 0.01061 Bitcoin, you'd be among the 2% that BlackRock recommends. And then you're definitely above average because we have to remember the average is still definitely below 2%. That's just what they recommend, which might be the target in the long run. Of course, there are also plenty of people who have way more exposure, for example. There are people who have 100% exposure, but there are also a whole lot of people who have absolutely zero exposure to Bitcoin. And that's why you really have to look for some kind of average values here. And this would really be the minimum threshold that you should at least be accumulating. If you're below that, then you should do everything you can, move heaven and earth to accumulate more Bitcoin. Maybe you should sell old things you no longer need. You could also do something like arbitrage, like health arbitrage. For example, just drink 1 or 2 fewer beers on the weekend and buy 1 or 2 more Satoshis instead, or maybe smoke 1 or 2 fewer cigarettes and buy 1 or 2 more Satoshis with that money. Maybe try going through a fasting period. Fasting is an amazing healing tool. Spiritually, mentally, and physically, fasting is honestly the best tool we've been given here on Earth to tune in more with our source, with our being. Maybe just skip a meal, try fasting, maybe don't eat anything in the morning, maybe do intermittent fasting, or if you're feeling good, even fast for a whole day. Of course, you can also do it for longer periods. Of course, I should also mention that this isn't health advice. That means you can do really simple things, and for anyone who says, yeah, I don't have enough money to save, there are so many simple things you can do. Sometimes it's really just 10 euros a week that you put aside. 100 euros a month that you save. That adds up over a few months, and then you're already at an investment of 1,000 euros. So no one can tell me that they really can't manage to do this. Yeah, let me know in the comments below if you agree with the ratings from BlackRock, from Larry Fink, if you can get on board with that. Whether you think people should definitely move away from having 0 Bitcoin and really make sure to get at least a few Bitcoin started. If you're all about Bitcoin, I'll drop a link below 21 Bitcoin, where you can buy Bitcoin easily, safely, and simply. And with the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Definitely check it out. Guys, see you next time. Peace.